Elvis.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
And the sweet sounds of Motown. Find them on the Oldies channel at apsradio.com.
Joining us now is Adam Rasmussen. He is with the Cultural Research Center out of Arizona, and I've talked to George Barna in the past. He also works with that organization. It comes out of Arizona Christian University, and you can find their website at culturalresearchcenter.com. We're going to talk to him about the spiritual state of America, and of course, it's always a difficult thing to measure. So we're going to talk to them about the metrics that they use, how they determine this, and what looks like some very bad news about the good news, and that is a lot of people are not getting the good news or ordering their lives based on that. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rasmussen. Let me ask you, first of all, since we're talking a lot about polls here and measuring public opinion, you're not connected with Scott Rasmussen in the polling organization, are you? Is it just a coincidence?
It's a great last name, probably just a coincidence.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on, because we've had a lot of, I've seen a lot of buzz about how the assassination of Charlie Kirk has caused a revival in terms of a lot of people reassessing their lives, as we always see when there's a sudden death of somebody who is very well known, especially Charlie Kirk being very outspoken about his faith. What did you see when you looked at this?
Arizona Christian University is in Glendale, which is right next door to where Charlie Kirk went to church. So a lot of our students and faculty knew him, and if people were watching on TV, they saw the memorial service, and wow, what a powerful life Charlie lived, and what he stood for, and the people that are with Turning Point USA, and just incredible. And those anecdotal stories that we've heard about people signing up to have Turning Point USA on their campus, like over 54,000 turned around for that. And we've heard about Bible sales being up from the American Bible Society and those kind of things. But the long-term results just really aren't showing much of a change as it comes to biblical worldview. And that's really what we study at the Cultural Research Center. We want to understand people's beliefs and behaviors that flow from those beliefs. And it's pretty much the same since September 2025. And we just measured that again. It's still at 4% for biblical worldview incidents.
And there's been a significant... Yeah, let me just interject here. I'm sorry. There was a significant decline from 2020. In the report that you just put out, you looked at 2020, 2023, and 2026. And there's a significant decline from 2020. Was 2020 higher than usual, or is this a long-term decline that's going on? Because I can imagine a lot of people were challenged with the things that were happening in their lives during 2020, and that might have caused an uptick. Was that the case, or is this just a long-term downward slope?
That's a great question, brother. We look at this trending since all the way back to 1994. So the construct that George Barna and the Cultural Research Center works with is what we call biblical worldview. So how does it square with the Bible? Not Christian, not Protestant, not Catholic. We're just looking at what does God say in his word. And in 95, it was at 11%. And it has declined down to where we are today at 4%. I don't think it's ever gone up. So the number you're looking at in 2020, it was at 6%. So across the U.S., among adults, 6% of them had a biblical worldview in 2020. COVID happened. We had these mandates where we couldn't meet together. And within 18 months, it reduced in 33%. So it went from 6 down to 4, which is kind of where we're at right now.
Well, I guess a part of that is, if you're going to a church and the church just shuts down, it's like, well, what we're doing is not important, I guess. That is, people are seeing a real conflict. And I guess that's really kind of how you look at this. You look at what do people say they believe, and do we see evidence of that in their life? And so if there's an inconsistency in what's happening in the leadership of the church, I imagine that helps a lot of people to turn the other way and say, well, we don't really think that they really believe this necessarily. It's a difficult thing to measure somebody's practice. So how do you do that? I mean, this is something that is very personal between an individual and God. It's difficult to measure, but you've got certain ways that you look at this to see how the culture is going. And of course, as I've said many times, culture as well as politics are all downstream from what you think about God, right?
Absolutely. I think it was Tozer that said, what you think about God is the most important part of who you are. And you're right, individually and then corporately as a culture, what we believe about God and morality affects everything. And the way we measure it is a scientific study, 2,000, a representative sample of 2,000 adults in the US. And it has a 95% confidence interval, plus or minus 1 or 2%. So this is kind of the gold standard of social science. And really, we're just measuring tendencies of central tendency, okay? Like right in the middle of averages. And there are about 50 questions. Some of them are demographic, depending on what we're focused on. But mostly, it takes about 20 minutes to fill out. And that's how we do it.
And you got different categories that you put people into. Talk a little bit about these, the terms that you've got here. First of all, what do you mean by worldview? Explain that to the audience.
Great question. So everyone has a worldview. It is the intellectual, emotional, and spiritual filter through which an individual experiences, interprets, and interacts with the world. So we all have a worldview, and it is the basis of every one of our decisions. So the biblical worldview is only one among many. And biblical theism, we are defining as coming from Scripture. And there are some basic beliefs there about God and Jesus and sin and humanity. It's not like you have to have a Bible degree. We even have assessments for 4th, 8th, and 12th grade students. But everyone has a worldview. So the biblical worldview is one of them. There's also, you can name it, like Islam or Marxism or a variety of different things. Most Americans are actually syncretists. So what they do is they pull and take from a variety of different sources. So they say, I believe in Jesus when he talks about forgiveness, but I reject him when he talks about marriage or about judgment. I'll take a little bit from karma and I'll take a little bit. And so it's just this mix that's very subjective and often very contradictory.
So it's a la carte, right?
Yeah.
The smorgasbord. You pick and choose what you want as you go through the cafeteria line. That's
smorgasbord, a good Scandinavian word right there. Yeah, that's a good one.
So you look at this and you say, well, okay, so the Bible says don't kill them. They say, well, I'm a Christian, but I think killing is okay. But then it comes down to some of these issues like, well, is that killing or is that killing? What about euthanasia? What about abortion? What about war and all these different other things that are out there? So then that's the point at which it becomes dicey, isn't it? Is that difficult to sort that out when you're doing the poll?
Yes. In our latest research that we just put out, it's showing that the very issue you've identified there is the one that's the most difficult for Americans. So marriage, life, family. It's very difficult for people to figure that out. And the Bible's really clear. So for whatever reason, and there could be many of them, that's the one area that's the toughest.
And of course, in a sense, when we look at this, the numbers are amazingly low. And yet, I guess really that shouldn't be a surprise when we look at the fruit of what is happening in America. When we look at our families falling apart, it's not a surprise that we don't agree with God's definition of marriage, and on and on. We could extend that to a lot of different things.
Yeah, I agree. It does come back to worldview, doesn't it? And so, as you said, there's really no surprise. I think the idea of marriage, sex, and babies as part of God's plan. And when we reject God, we reject all the good things that children are a blessing from the Lord, and so is family. And we're not honoring the marriage bed, as it says in Hebrews. There's a lot that we're missing on the greatest things in life because we reject God.
That's right.
And you cannot get there from a purely secular or naturalistic worldview. You can't get there just by looking under a microscope or looking at some kind of ethnographic study to say what is absolute. That has to be revealed from our Creator. And when it is revealed, it is corroborated by the world because He created the world. So it's not against all of these things. It actually squares with reality and human flourishing, but you can't get there by rejecting the Lord. You just can't.
That's right. Yeah, I spent some time talking this week about John Cleese and Richard Dawkins as they're looking at the Islamification of London. They're bemoaning the fact that they're losing Christian culture and Western civilization and things that have been the bedrock of a lot of individual liberties that they've enjoyed and things like that. And yet the two of them have been pretty instrumental in rejecting the root of that, and so now they cry because they don't have the fruit. And yet it's been a cut flower society for a very long time. I mean, they cut themselves off from the root, off from Christ, and yet, the flowers in the vase were still very pretty for quite a while, but now they're all dropping off dead, aren't they?
That is such a good point, and I agree 100% because when you look at these neo-Darwinists, when you look at atheism or this Marxism that is anti-church, anti-family, anti-God, and when you look at that, I would say a godless atheism will take on the flavor of its culture. So when you have guys like Dawkins say, "Oh, be loving," and things like that, I say, why? Yeah. Jesus is the one that said that, not Darwin. Okay, so for me, when I look at atheism, it's like tofu. Okay, it has no flavor. It takes on the flavor of its culture. So all of a sudden, you get rid of Christianity in Great Britain, and what you're going to have is whatever's in the culture. So the atheism itself looks very different when it's paired with, let's say, Islam, or when it's paired with Marxism under Soviet Russia or whatever. We've seen it over and over again. There is no real flavor. It only takes what's there. And so for people to be very optimistic about Darwinism or neo-Darwinism in a Christian culture is one thing. But once you cut, like you said, it's a cut flower proposition here. Once you cut off Christianity, you do not have love. You do not have individual liberty or any of these things that we've talked about.
That's right. That's right. Now, you got, in terms of breaking this down, you got several different categories of worldview. You talk about integrated disciples, emergent followers, and world citizens. What do you mean by those terms?
That's a great question. So when we talk about biblical worldview incidents, we're measuring what we would call integrated disciples. So Jesus said, "Go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them." So an integrated disciple is someone who understands the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, and they're living in accordance with those commands and principles in the Bible. Now, they're not perfect. That's even part of the biblical worldview, right? We're sinners. Right. Yeah. But an integrated disciple is someone who really knows the word, and they are drawing upon it in prayer, and they're living that out. There are, it's about 1 in 25 adults are an integrated disciple, or 4%. There's another 10%, we call those emerging followers, and they're definitely not as biblical in their thinking and behaviors. However, they do have faith. They are they have some gaps in their understanding of the Bible and in the application of some of its principles, but there's a huge potential here because they believe. They're probably saved and going to heaven and all of those good things. It's just they need to be discipled up. They need to have their thoughts and behaviors fall more in line with Scripture. And so we're looking at 1 in 10 here. There are 25 million Americans in this category. And then the rest we would call we would call those world citizens, 85%. So 85% of Americans, we would say, aren't really operating from a biblical worldview. They may use biblical language. They may be like my friend a few years ago. He called himself a creaster because he went to church on Christmas and Easter. Okay. So, but, they're more nominative in their way of looking at faith. They're more syncretistic. And we would say they're more operating on what's out there in the air, in the worldview.
And so what does it look like between an emergent follower and somebody who is a holiday Christian, or like you were describing there? What do you see that's different with the emerging followers?
So emerging followers would be able to articulate how a person is saved, and they would believe it. So that we're saved by faith in Jesus Christ and by grace alone, not by works. They would say that God is a loving creator of the universe, and he's in charge, and he's given us moral rules. Things will start to get a little dicey, though, as they start to work some of those finer points out, like you and I were talking earlier about sanctity of life and the definition of marriage and things getting a little more fuzzy on those. So
in terms of application in their life, that's where the fuzziness is, right?
Right. Yeah. And across the board, most Americans they understand the importance of having meaning and purpose in their life. And it's a good thing. Many of them are very close to what the Bible says. And so the emerging followers would be in that same category. So they've got a lot of good things going. But can you imagine what would happen if people, one-on-one and in small groups would reach out to their neighbors and family members who have questions about the Lord and really could disciple them in relationship? Boy, we would see huge changes with all these numbers that you and I have been talking about, because the physical symptoms of children being born out of wedlock, or the divorce rate, or people defaulting on loans, or any of these things, these societal ills, they're just physical symptoms of a spiritual problem. So if we can help people come back to their Creator who loves them and follow what he says in his word, could you imagine 25 million Americans if they started following those things and being loving people, loving God first, and loving their spouses and children? Can you imagine what an exciting place this would be?
Oh, yeah. And as I pointed out many times, when we look at something like the war on drugs, which is going to turn 55 this summer, I've pointed out many times, I've had several guests on the program who've talked about how they were involved in gangs, or they're involved in drug addiction, or whatever. The thing that turned it around in their life was becoming a Christian, and they completely changed everything. And so when we look at the scourge of drugs, when we look at the scourge of the government's reaction to drugs, bringing out a big hammer and hitting people with it, or creating a police surveillance state, or all the many other things that have happened, the damage to our Constitution, to our court systems, and all the rest of this stuff, when you look at it, yeah, it is really the consequences of this make all the difference in the world. And the sad thing is, as I'm looking at these numbers, going from 2020, 2023 to 2026, so 3 years apart, I see a constant decline in the emergent followers. I mean, it isn't that, people are getting into this situation where they are beginning a relationship with Christ, but they just really haven't applied it in their life. That has taken a huge drop. It's dropped from 19% in 2020 to 10% in 2026. It's been cut in half in just that short period of time.
You're right. It is sad. And we have to remember that God's call is for everyone, every single person in the United States. And all of us are to yield our lives to Jesus as our Savior and Lord. And as you were mentioning, people like Chuck Colson, we could go on, when they give their life to Jesus and they allow him to be the leader of their lives. Charlie Kirk, we mentioned him before. I just can't think of a better leader or moral structure for individual flourishing or the flourishing of a nation. And it's absolutely I don't know if it's hilarious, it's sad, it's depressing, whatever. It's just shocking that Jesus and the church are so under attack. And it's always been that way. But I thought here in the United States, we said that we trust in God. And in the Constitution, it's not the number one right in the Bill of Rights. The number one is to have freedom of religion and freedom of speech.
Yes.
And then in the Declaration of Independence, 4 times God is mentioned as the one that gives us these rights. He's our creator, and we've been given these rights by him of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not the government. The government should just say, okay, hands off. That is for all humans. And here in America, it doesn't seem like we want to give that credit back to God, and to understand we have to live under his principles. And I just can't find it anywhere else like the Bible and in Jesus.
Well, that's why when we look at this, I think it's because we've had it so easy. That is, I've heard people call it affluenza, It's like that's a pandemic that's been going around America. When things get too easy for you and you get too focused on circumstances, especially getting too focused on money because you see that as your path to comfort. As the Bible said, the love of money is the root of all evil. And that's what we're really seeing here in America. It's amazing that as people become prosperous, and we see this, I think, on an individual basis as well as on a collective basis, they turn away from God. We don't need God anymore. So you go through this cycle in societies, and I'm afraid we're about to go to a period of time where we're going to be crying out to God for help because I think we're about to turn the corner into really bad economic times. But perhaps that'll be a revival. Who knows?
Oh, yes, I hope so. I mean, you and I can't make the Holy Spirit move, but God can. And we pray that he does that there's a revival. And I agree with you that that affluenza is a great way to say it. The late Dr. Francis Schaeffer said that a lot of times people will do anything to protect their personal peace and affluence.
Yeah.
Just as long as it doesn't bother me, leave it out of my life. But the problem is, we're called to be stewards of our own lives. And then here in a free country, we have a responsibility to continue to help our neighbors and to love them. And that's the call of a Christian, not just to pursue a life of pleasure, but a life of fulfillment. And I think there's a huge difference between those two. We did a study in September of 2024 that made a moderate to strong correlation. It's an inverse correlation. So one goes up, the other goes down between anxiety, depression, fear, suicidal thoughts, and the biblical worldview. So what I mean to say is the more biblical worldview you have, the less incidence of anxiety, depression, and fear and suicidal thoughts you have. It's kind of like when you study more, okay, you'll get less answers wrong on the quiz. Okay, so it's an inverse correlation.
That's right. Yeah.
And sadly, what we see that goes right along with that is the older you are, the more likely it is that you have a biblical worldview. So boomers, Xers, okay, and then millennials and Z, what we found is they have the least amount of biblical worldview. So if a child is being raised right now in a home and they're under 17, there's a 1 in 100 chance that, or less, that they'll have a biblical worldview.
Wow.
The problem is, without a biblical worldview, without knowing that God loves them, they're being raised in a family that believes that, and things like that, there's a real pressure to find these definitions of who I am, why am I here, what's important in life, and that's just too much for children to come up with all on their own. So without the biblical worldview, they have extreme anxiety, depression, fear, all of these things. So the antidote, again, is to help these young families, moms and dads that are trying to get through this tough life, and to come around the young families and build them up and help them raise their children according to the Bible.
And of course, the society offers answers to all those things. They're just the wrong answers. They go to school, they watch entertainment world that's there. They've got answers for all those issues. And they're the wrong ones. They even can't help them to figure out whether they're a boy or girl. I mean, that's the reality of how bad things have gotten, isn't it?
I agree 100%. Yeah, you just can't you can't YouTube or TikTok your way to a flourishing life.
That's right.
And you can't just put a device in front of a child and think that's going to help them to become a full human being, to know how to interact with others, to have proper etiquette, to really aim for the stars. There's just not enough there.
Let me ask you if
that goes back to real relationships.
That's right. Let me ask you along that line. When you talk about integrated disciples, is there a part of that has to do with parenting and people's attitude toward that and what they want to do in terms of taking control of what their children are taught? Is that something that you ask about?
Absolutely. I'm trying to see if I have it on. I might have it back in my other office. We have a wonderful resource from the Cultural Research Center called Raising Spiritual Champions. And it has to do with those of us that are under the age of 12. And one of the things parents have to do is they have to actually screen what their children watch, because more than parents, teachers, coaches, friends, pastors, youth workers combined, is the influence of media. So we need to understand that these things here are actually meant to be discipleship tools, and that everything that we're doing with our children is forming and shaping their souls. And a lot of parents, they're just trying to get through the day. Nobody's taught them how to do that. So our whole attitude about worldview is this: worldview for why? Why do we even care about worldview? Jesus Christ did not die for worldview. He was not raised for worldview. He died and was raised again for his disciples. So we're using worldview to build discipleship. So we're just saying, hey, look, here's some areas to grow. Here are some areas where you're strong, but we want to help the church and we want to help families. And so, yes, if we want to see the next generation flourish, we have to help parents, and parents have to help their children. And I'm not sure that's the metric people are actually looking at.
And I think that's where the discipleship goes wrong in the first place, because it is with the parent-child relationship. And I think that's why we've seen a continual downgrade in terms of what is happening in America, because we have given up the responsibility of raising our kids. We've delegated it out to other people, or as you point out, we're just so busy we don't have time to do it ourselves. And so that's really, I think, what is happening with us. Now, you also talk about born-again Christians. How does that fall into your categories?
So there are two kinds of born-again Christians, according to our research. One is people that would say, oh, yeah, born-again Christian, that's what I am. And then the other would be theologically identified born-again Christians. And those would be people that could answer this question. If Jesus, it's the old evangelism explosion question. If Jesus should say to you, why should I let you into my heaven? Or God would say that, you would say something like, I've confessed my sins and I believe that Jesus Christ died and rose again to save me and bring me to heaven. That is a theologically identified born-again Christian. We've got labels for everything. So.
I got you. Let me ask you, this is kind of off the mark here a little bit, but because it's speculation, it's not data that you've actually recorded. But I've also talked about this upcoming UFO disclosure thing. I call it a UFO hoax. And we've got a lot of politicians now that are working, and a lot of influencers are working to get everybody excited about this. This is something that I've seen in the culture. I've seen coming out of Hollywood. And of course, it's part of the worldview and paradigm that people like Carl Sagan have pushed for a very long time. And that is that there are aliens from outer space who are coming here. I see this as not a biblical worldview. I see this as an evolutionary worldview. And yet you have people like Tim Burchett say, well, no, I think that's Christian. It's whatever it is out there, we'll say that God created it. But I see this as really reinforcing the evolutionary worldview. What do you think is going to be the response, since you watch people closely with this stuff? How do you think that's going to affect these numbers when something like that comes out and they start? There's been a lot of push with this to convince people that this is really real and that it is not angels or demons, but it's extraterrestrial beings from another universe or whatever. What do you think that's going to do to, is that going to be another major hit when we see that coming?
It's a distraction and a fascinating one. And I've heard it all before, my brother.
Yeah,
so like,
I agree.
People have told me Genesis 6, the Nephilim were from, somewhere else. Carl Sagan said the universe is all that ever was, is, or ever will be. I mean, he's quoting Revelation there, ascribing eternality, which belongs to the uncreated creator, but he's giving it to the universe. So Carl Sagan believed in a closed universe. Dawkins said, if there is life out there, it had to have been evolved. So it is, like you said, a matrix of these things. We see it in all kinds of movies out there, and it's something people believe in. And as such, because they reject Jesus, it's a distraction. So as me personally, if we found that there was alien life out there, it doesn't necessarily bother me, because the scripture talks about seraphim and cherubim and all of these interesting angelic beings and things like that. But I know of only one that was made in his image, and that is man. And I only know of one name by which we must be saved, and that's Jesus. So that's what I can focus on.
Yes.
It's almost like the problem of evil. Like, does evil exist? Yes. Did God create it? No. How does this work? You can speculate, but let's just deal with the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a problem here, and we have solutions, and there's some fuzzy edges. So when people start, working on that as proof for their worldview, I think it's just a distraction.
Yeah, I think when I look at it, we look at the evolution creation issue, it's something that actually built my faith quite a bit when you look at it. I mean, there isn't any, you're not going to get something from nothing. And you have to have an intelligence to organize this stuff. And so that's what the Bible posits, and really that's the only thing that makes any logical sense to me, is that there would be a creator God that put everything together and created it out of nothing. And so you have to have an eternal intelligence, I think. But I think there's a massive deception that is underway. As you point out, it'll be a distraction. I think that's an underlying cause for it. They want to have a political distraction for a variety of reasons. But I think it's going to be something that, I don't know, it's been around for quite some time. So perhaps the people are going to buy into it or already bought into it. I'm not really sure what's going to happen with it, but it'll be interesting to see how that affects the numbers. So moving forward here, what do you think? Again, you've got some resources there at your university that can help people, I think, to get a handle on this. And I think really it begins at home, doesn't it? In terms of discipling children. If we lose this generation, and this is something that every tyrant has understood, said, give me the kids in the first few years, they're mine for life. God said the same thing. And he told parents, he said, when you're with your kids on the way, teach them about this, teach them about that. That is our responsibility as parents. If we don't do it, somebody else is going to take them over and disciple them into their worldview, isn't it?
100%. Ephesians 6, Deuteronomy 6, very clear. And in Deuteronomy 6, it's interesting. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, he is one." And the word Shema there. So, but before he says, talk about me on the way and when you rise up and when you do all these things, when you live, basically.
Yes.
He is saying these words need to be on your heart. So I think as parents, grandparents, any of us that have teachers, impact on the next generation, we have to ask the question, is God's word on my heart?
Yes.
Am I because we can't really impact the next generation. We can impact our own hearts. Lord, please use me. And then the Lord can bless these young people. So I think it's not about them, it's about us.
I agree.
And this is the way God changes the culture. It goes this way. God changes the church, and the church changes the culture. And all through scripture, we see that. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face. And judgment begins with the household of God, and so on and so forth. So you and I can only say, oh Lord, hine, here am I, hinine, I'm here, Lord, come work in my life. And then with those that I influence, and so on and so forth. And we really need to get back to that. And God needs to be our number one love. It's not a burdensome command to love God and love others. It's not.
I absolutely agree.
Easy, though. Yeah. Like you and I were saying, deception happens this way: distraction, deception. And it's like we're not in an information world anymore. We're in an attention world. So it's not even information. It's just like the cat that follows the laser on the wall. And we just get distracted. But Jesus Christ, him, yeah, squirrel. Okay, yeah, Jesus Christ, him exalted. There is nothing greater. And we have to set our hearts to that true north. And when we do that, maybe the Lord's using this message today in somebody's life. When we do that and we say, Lord, I'm available, don't put any limits on what God can do with one person, with many.
I agree.
And that's our message.
I agree. You know, I think back to always the instructions like on a plane, right? The plane's lost pressure and the little things drop down from the ceiling, the mask. You know, they always tell everybody, if you're with a young child, put it on yourself first, because otherwise, if you're gone, there's nobody's going to help the kids. So that really is what we need to do. We need to look at that. I think it can be God can move in our hearts to drive us towards Him, in the sense that we constantly see that God turns the hearts of the fathers towards their children. That is always something that we see happening during revivals of a culture, of a society. That is, but that's God working in your heart to do that. But you really do need to focus on your own relationship. Make sure that's there. Make sure you've got your lifeline going. And then you can try to help others, whether it's your children or somebody else that you know. I absolutely agree with that. That's really where it starts. Again, we're talking to Dr. Adam Rasmussen, Arizona Christian University, and the website is culturalresearchcenter.com. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's fascinating, even though it is, I guess we should say, a little bit disturbing. It's the bad news about the good news that's there. And the good news is always going to be there. There's nothing that's going to change that. That is the good news for each and every one of us individually. We look at what is happening in our society. We don't like where it's going. We don't like the politics. We don't like the society. And yet that is the fruit of what is happening. But nobody can come between us and God. That is the key thing. We don't have to have a consensus that is there. Even if it's just 1% or less, we can still have a relationship with God. No one can get in the way of that. Except you yourself. And so that is what we need to focus on. And that really is our hope, I think. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rasmussen.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at davidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. TheDavidKnightShow.com.